Well, thank you all for tuning up to our webinar. Really, I'd like it to be a bit of a discussion, so not just me talking the whole time. And to help facilitate that, I've actually asked a couple of people to share some of their experiences as well. So I've asked Jeanette to talk about some of her experiences, and also Meredith. And Kate Coleman, I don't know if people know Kate Coleman or not from MGSE, but she's going to be sharing virtually, because she's actually currently in another webinar, but she has pre-recorded a little presentation for us, so that's great. So I'm just going to jump into some screen sharing. Let me just check. Okay. So you should hopefully be able to see my screen now, which has a little title there, Hybrid Teaching Strategies. And this is actually in Evernote. The QR code, if you've got a smartphone there with a camera, you can quickly scan that. If you've got a relatively modern smartphone, either an iPhone or an Android phone, if you just turn your camera on the phone and point it at the QR code, it will just recognize that as a QR code and give you a link. It's a web link. So this is just a bit of a recursive link back to the notes itself, but I'll be sort of linking off these, and it might be useful for you to bookmark that, because we'll be jumping around a few different examples today, and you might want to keep this as a bit of a reference. There's also a tiny URL there, which is short and linked to the same page, which is an Evernote, which is case sensitive. All the letters are actually lowercase, tinyurl.com/y9v64z04. So I guess just a little bit about myself to start with. You'll find my profile on the CSHE site. And I've got a bit of an overview using an Adobe Spark presentation. I thought maybe I wasn't going to show you this, but I thought maybe I'll just quickly sort of show a little bit here. But you can go through this at your leisure later if you decide to. But just to give you a little bit of background about me, because a lot of my background is actually in creative arts, not necessarily fine arts, but particularly in music. And I started, my first degree was in engineering, electrical and electronic. But I did get sort of 2 years into it and decided I was really bored with it, because I was more interested in people than learning about electrons and maths theory and theoretical maths. And then I ended up designing loudspeakers for my first job, and actually using the theoretical maths that I'd learned about in my university undergraduate degree, but had no link to actual practical outputs around it. So it was kind of like, if you just told me what the point of learning that maths was, then I might have been interested, because I did actually end up using it. Anyway, so there's me a few years ago with a bit more hair and trying to look cool and playing in a band. We used to basically rock and try to tour around the country and played all around the different music festivals in New Zealand, etc. Didn't quite make it to overseas, but we thought we were cool anyway. So we created our own EP, recorded ourselves, and I did a solo album myself after that. And I ended up being a youth pastor and looking at music and drama and how we could use that. And then kind of moved from there into actually teaching audio engineering and music production. Here's my lovely wife. So this is my class back in 1999, I think it was, with the first sort of clamshell iBooks that came out. I don't know if you remember them, but they were pretty cool. They had great colors. You had a choice of about 3 or 4 different colors. And you could tell the more wealthy students there, because they've got the gray ones and they were the up-spec ones. But effectively, we were a small polytech teaching these niche courses around audio engineering. It was actually based on the west coast of the South Island, if you know any New Zealand geography, in a place, little town called Greymouth. And the maximum capacity there of students that they would get was about 150. So they created these niche market courses, which include the contemporary music and audio engineering, music production. But all the students were coming from the big cities, from Christchurch, Wellington, Auckland. And so they established a remote campus in Auckland, and that's where I ended up teaching on. But because we were such a small polytech, we didn't have a big funding, and you know, what we were doing in the late 90s was computer based. So all, you know, audio engineering and music production had gone from tape to digital, and yet we couldn't really afford a computer lab to teach our students Pro Tools and Logic and notation software, etc. And so I came up with this scheme of all our students basically bought their own laptop, and we designed the course around that. So it was very much around students engaging with their own device, and they were required to bring them to every class and do presentations, etc. And so it was a pretty cool, fun time. In fact, it started with, at that point, the Polytech didn't even have email, so I had to use my own email, and they had no internet, so I had to bring the first Apple Airport. I don't know if you remember those. They sort of looked like a little spaceship, but it was a Wi-Fi hub, and I'd bring that into class, connect over dial-up, and share my home internet connection with all my students on their iBooks, and you can imagine how slow that was. And then eventually we got into broadband, and I set up the Polytech online e-learning suite and got them networked between the campuses, etc., etc. And from there I moved into our largest Polytech, and it was an interesting experience because I moved from one of the smallest to the largest, and the smallest being really cool, doing this cool stuff around laptops and every student having their own laptop, to the largest where no one had any concept of why would a student want a laptop. And then rethinking, well, what are the tools that our students had? And effectively it was feature phones at that stage. And then of course, Apple revolutionized phones with the iPhone, and then the iPad. And we looked at how the iPad could be used in music and contemporary music and recording, etc. and other contexts. So I won't bore you with that anymore. I'll just go back into the main notes here. But you can find out a little bit more about myself there. So I've asked today Meredith from Arts and Catherine Coleman from MGSE and Jeanette Tamplin to give us a bit of an overview of some of their experiences that I think are relevant as well. I've also put together some notes around a Padlet. There was a link that was shared. We've actually got two versions of the Padlet. So Meredith and her team have hosted a version of Padlet for the arts faculty. And so I've made a copy of that on that platform. But the one I'm going to use today is actually the free version of Padlet that I've just set up myself, because it looks a little bit nicer, because when I imported everything into the University of Melbourne Padlet, it lost a lot of the, the context. And so I'm using that one, which is linked off this Evernote. We've also got some research references that might be useful to you using a Mendeley shared group, which you can contribute to if you'd like. And we're also using that with my GCUT class, a facilitating online learning class. We've got a different group for them. And we've just launched a group, research network group from the Centre for Study in Higher Education around the Scholarship of Technology Enhanced Learning that you might actually be interested in joining or contributing to. So those are just some of the core links that I'll be looking at today. And I've also just got a couple of links there if you want to explore how to create your own QR codes and short codes. There's a couple of links there. But at this point, I'm going to jump into my Padlet. So this is just using padlet.com, and this is basically the original version of the Padlet that I've copied across to the University of Melbourne Padlet install, and is just linked off that Evernote. So what I've effectively done here is co-created this with a group. This is from the Ascot Mobile Learning Special Interest Group, which I lead. And over a number of weeks, we just kind of brainstormed how different technologies could speak into our current, practice change and crisis, and how do we go about reimagining what we do, particularly in these very, very practical sort of subjects, and a lot of them which would traditionally be very much face-to-face. How can we have some strategies for trying to create that sort of community online? And I've called this hybrid teaching strategies because originally the idea was that it would be a mix of face-to-face and online at this stage. But of course, with the outbreaks in Melbourne, that's no longer a reality. It's back to fully online. But very much these strategies work in both cases. So I've just organized this. If you haven't used Padlet before, this is just one of the modes that Padlet comes in. You can have these columns, and just organized it via themes along the columns. So the first column is models and frameworks. And I'll come back to this in a moment as to actually what's there. And then the next column is networked learning communities as a bit of a core concept. I'm just going to reload this Padlet. It seems to have frozen. Now it's moving, which is good. Looking at asynchronous strategies. So looking at a range of different types of strategies. Can everyone still see my screen? Yes, okay, cool, great. And then synchronous strategies, so different types of approaches, looking at, because we were looking at a whole range of different contexts, we've got some ideas and thoughts around labs and practical class strategies, studio-based strategies, designing learner-centric ecologies of resources. And I think this is kind of a key concept that you may not have come across, which I think speaks into how to go about doing this. And then a column around some resources, some theoretical resources, some practical resources. And then a column for questions. So I'd really like people to engage with the Padlet live if you feel like it. As you can see, you can actually give feedback on these different items that are placed there by giving ratings, by star ratings. You can make comments. And if you want to, you can even write into these columns if you've got some cool suggestions or examples that you'd like to share, or if you've got questions, put them into the questions column. So that's the very brief sort of overview. And I want to sort of hand over to Meredith and get Meredith to just give us some ideas. Because actually this idea around the Padlet, I stole off Meredith. I have used Padlet in the past, but not for a while. And I've got to say, I've been quite impressed with how Padlet has actually developed into a really quite a groovy sort of a sharing type of a tool. There's never just one tool that does everything, but I like, for example, that you can get a QR code, you can embed this in your site, and it gives you great sharing tools and different ways of interacting. You can print it as a PDF if you want an offline copy of it, etc. So I'm going to flick over to Meredith. Meredith's going to talk us through some of her strategies that she's used with the Faculty of Arts.
Thanks, Tom. Is it okay if I share my screen?
Yeah, I've just stopped sharing mine.
Okay, can everyone see that okay? I'm going to be sharing a few different screens and jumping between things. So my name's Meredith and I'm from the Faculty of Arts, Manager of E-Learning, E-Teaching. So I manage a small team of EdTech type people. and we work to support teaching staff. So we're not academics, we're professional staff. We have a videographer in our team, LMS EdTech guru, Mitch Buzzer. We've got a loans equipment office as well, so we support our Centre for Journalism. A lot of the media comms and journalism subjects have similar practices, I think, to what your area does as well. So we also support those areas as well. So I thought I'd share with you sort of, I suppose, my ecology of resources for hybrid teaching that I've been developing, and this is very much organic, and I'll also just give you a bit of an insight into how we support our teaching staff, and then some examples of what our teaching staff have been doing. So in previous years, we have run a face-to-face blended learning bootcamp. So I first started developing this kind of big map of using Padlet of resources in this boot camp that we used to run. So we used to run this pre-semester for a couple of days, and teaching staff would have a one-day intensive where we'd go through a whole range of different tools. So very much my focus is on technology enhanced learning and the affordances of tools. And also I'm very interested because we have such a range of disciplines within the Faculty of Arts. So Faculty of Arts, Humanities, Social Sciences, Languages. So I've been very much interested in how we can use technology to better enhance and support teaching in our range of disciplines. So teaching staff had the opportunity to come to this for a couple of days. We talked all about how we teach in our classrooms. We've got fantastic collaborative classrooms in Arts West, in the Arts West building. And so we used to talk about some of the active learning standard methods and approaches, and how we could use fairly standard, simple to use digital tools combined with those active learning methods. And it used to be all scaffolded in a learning design framework. Very much teaching staff agency was important. Teachers would decide what they wanted to focus on, what their sort of e-learning project would be. Some of them, used to like to make high quality videos. Some would be making more DIY type video, or other kind of approaches to things. So that's sort of where this idea started. And then when we went off campus, everything kind of happened. I found myself in the week that the uni was talking about closing, running lots of sessions in conjunction with my colleagues at Learning Environments about how we teach online through Canvas and Zoom. So we ran a whole lot of sessions, and I just started populating this Padlet wall with all the resources to try to help staff just quickly find tools and approaches and things that they could use. So it was very much very pragmatic to start off with, and very much, the tips were really to just give some insights into for teaching staff in what they could do. So this one here was very much about teaching staff thinking through maintaining teacher presence, building in what engagement they could quite quickly with teaching with Zoom, and being very pragmatic from a video recording, self-recording perspective in what they were going to do. So they were the sort of things that we focused on very early on. So this has grown over time. I also spent a fair bit of time with our language teaching staff in some strategies around what they could do, because obviously they're used to having classes, and the oral practice is very important. So this is organically grown. There is articles and some literature framing this that's built in around student engagement, what really students are wanting in this period, and other tips and strategies all the way through. So it's kind of almost ready for a bit of a rehaul in terms of organisation, but that's kind of where it's at the moment. I actually have been putting together, I'll just share this screen here. We ran a program the last couple of weeks on helping teaching staff prepare for second semester. So again, that's another Padlet wall that's got kind of all the resources for all the sessions that we ran in sort of helping teaching staff to be better prepared for second semester and to really improve the quality of what they were doing online. And I'm just going to quickly just take you through what some of my tips and strategies were, and then I'm going to quickly share some examples from language disciplines and from one from culture and communications and one from journalism, because I think they're the disciplines that probably are most similar perhaps from my faculty to your faculty, and possibly some of these approaches and some of the tools, principally Padlet, but I'll also show you one in SeatBeak as well. They might give you some ideas of possibly things that you might want to do in your area. So one of the big things I've been really focusing on is really the role of Canvas in all of this. With that rapid move to remote teaching and learning, it's been such a deep immersion into Canvas with the migration for all of us. And that intentionality of how we use the LMS, I think, is just so crucial. So some of our strategies that I've already covered are sort of here with the sort of themed help sessions that we've run virtual. We've had virtual working bees for teaching staff. We've really tried to get them using Canvas very intentionally and using it to maximum ability as well. We've tried to model some of approaches in some of the training that we've delivered as well, and we've tried to maintain that discipline specific layer over things and the tools that we use as well. So just getting back to that focus on Canvas, I've been trying to really promote the idea of every subject site being its own learning community, being its own online hub that's really tying together all of the communication with students, all of the learning materials, the synchronous and asynchronous interaction with students, summative and formative assessment, individual and group activities. So as we're finding that we're coming up with more and more sort of hybrid environments where there might be, some classes maybe later this semester that will run on campus in the same subjects that are running online now. There's a lot of that sort of hybrid and parallel type movement going on. We've got students that are, all over the world. So I think, really thinking intentionally around how we use the synchronous and asynchronous and letting Canvas be the glue that joins that together, and thinking through what tools we might use, the affordances of the tools, to ensure that we've got as much opportunity for students that are in other time zones to be able to interact and still contribute as well. And I guess another tip is really thinking through the lens of a student in this, so thinking like a student, and how your students are experiencing the learning materials and interactivity in Canvas. So I've been pushing very much about the kind of the structure of, and trying to optimise, making sure that we've got a sequence, that students know what order they're working through materials in Canvas, that it's very clear to them where they find resources as well. So they're pretty easy wins, but that's been something I've been focusing on. And then a focus obviously on various learning technologies to help with engagement and teacher presence as well, and also peer interaction. So one of the tools that we've been looking at is this tool called Perusal. It's an e-reader, a collaborative reading tool, and it's one of those LTIs that plugs into Canvas. So if you go into the settings of your subject in Canvas, you can actually drag it up from the bottom into the top part, so it'll appear in your subject navigation. So it's a really nice tool. It's been used by our Masters of Translation subjects, and used by students asynchronously to engage with each other as they go through their readings. And it does read out in different languages as well. So the Masters of Translation Chinese program have been using it quite a lot. And there are some resources that are sitting in Canvas Commons. There's 2 videos from one of the tutors in the Masters of Translation program, Michael Broughton. So if you're interested in exploring that tool, you can have a look at that. But it's really given teaching staff a better idea of students' understanding, and then they take teaching staff have been taking the asynchronous discussion points and integrating them into the synchronous Zoom classes, and then continuing that dialogue. So that's been quite a useful way of getting students engaged and helping with that language program. This is another example of from Korean language, and in this example, this is using a Padlet wall where students have been able to, in pairs, practice their conversation, and Padlet's got an option where you can record that within Padlet. So students have been able to do that and then post that, or they've been able to record it outside of Canva, outside of Padlet, and then post that in. And this method has also been used with worksheets, with students being able to work together on a worksheet and then post that together, and then teaching staff are able to give feedback using the comments in Padlet. This is an example from a French subject, which I'm going to talk a bit more about in a moment in a different context. But students have been able to, yeah, again, just introduce themselves and post their little videos onto Padlet. So it just keeps everything in the one place. It's very easy to use, and it makes it easy for teaching staff also to be able to give feedback. This is another example of students interacting in a Padlet wall for a subject that's called In the Heart of the Loire Valley, which is normally, well, it has been taught in the past overseas, obviously in the Loire Valley as a winter intensive, and it was meant to be overseas this year. So we actually redesigned the subject last year so that every second year it can run as a fully online subject, which it's quite an interesting idea given that it's all about the different chateaus in the Loire Valley. But all the work we did last year has really paid off because it's been able to run fully online this year. And I'm going to show you some examples of that in SeatBeak at them just in a moment. This one too is another Padlet example. I'm going to show you the actual Padlet wall in a moment, but this is from our Culture and Communications program, and students have used Padlet to be able to have an on-country experience online. So they've been able to post, and then I'll show you the examples in a moment. I'll come back to that. And then we've also got quite a big emphasis in my faculty on object-based learning, and just before we went on campus, I think it was very much the last day, our videographer went into the OBL lab with an academic and sort of filmed, you know, high resolution objects, and then that's been able to be edited from home and then used in teaching and learning. So that's, yeah, also been a bit of a technique we've used. We've also just tried to bring in a physical campus into our LMS sites and yeah, just sort of tried to combine that a little bit as well. And then, as I mentioned, our loans equipment office has been closed, but Daniel, that manages our loans equipment offices, is also a videographer. So he's made some very high quality how-to videos that have been used by the journalism students in their teaching and learning remotely. So that's also been quite useful as a technique. And then, yeah, we've also got some other examples, which I probably don't have time to go into. So I'm just going to very quickly show you, this is the In the Heart of the Loire Valley Canvas site. And you can see here that we've got these site visits that have been developed quite simply. And I'm going to show you, they're actually in SeatBeak, and Tom was the person who showed me SeatBeak at a conference, a SLIDE conference many years ago. So I only know about this because of Tom. So we actually took, these are 180-degree photos that the academic actually had, and we were able to put them in SeatBeak and create these virtual site visits for the students. And then we've tried to replicate the sort of experience that they would have on site, where they might have curators talking to them, or they might have, you know, resources that they go and have a look at. So these are all hotspots to different things. So this is one example. So it's, I mean, it's not kind of, some of them are not stitched together perfectly well, but these are resources where students can explore these in their own time. And, you know, really the sort of number of hotspots you add is infinite. So that's been just a technique that we've used during this time, which has worked quite well. And there's another example there. So this one, it goes from the facade, from the outside to the inside. And again, we've just combined together what resources teaching staff had. This one we tried to do a little bit, this has got a nice story, interesting story. So we tried to have a little bit of an escape room type experience for students where they've got to kind of follow through and find out about this particular event of the assassination of the Duke. And then coming back to what I mentioned before about the on-country experience for a group of students. So this shows you a Padlet wall within a Padlet wall, really. Padlet walls, like a Padlet wall hub is what I call this. So this links out into different tutorial groups, students work in different tutorial groups. And you can see just here the posts. So they've been able to post their reflections, some references, and then they comment on each other's posts. So I think they had to comment on 3 other posts. And there is, in the PDF, I'll share the PDF that I showed before. Where are we here? There is a nice video with the academic that we filmed. And so, yeah, I'll share that link later and you can watch that and you can actually hear the academic talk about this particular example of this on-country experience for students. So that's really, yeah, I guess that's really all I've got to share. I'll stop sharing and hand back to Tom.
Thanks, Meredith. Yeah, so a great lot of resources there. The link to Meredith's Padlet is actually in the resources column of my Padlet, so you can find that there. And I'm sure Meredith will be happy to share all of her resources and links as well. So I'm just going to jump back to screen sharing again. Back to my Padlet, and we're not trying to promote Padlet here in this session. It just so happens that we did a lot of brainstorming and we used that as the tool, and I thought it was very nice visually as well. So I guess looking at some of the key themes, one of the things I really wanted to find out from
I think you might be sharing the wrong screen because we can see the Zoom, not the Padlet.
Oh, okay. It's a bit of a newbie error, isn't it? Oh yes, I'm sharing desktop 1, not 2.
I thought it was a kind of meta activity for us to see, us
yeah,
a couple of times.
That was you know, that was who gets the chocolate fish. So thank you, Jeanette. You're now my star student. Anyway, so hopefully I'm sharing the correct screen now. Anyway, back to the Padlet. So I want to just point out a couple of the key ideas and themes, but before I sort of went too far down that, I did actually have a question for everyone. And I guess I wanted to find out, as far as Faculty of Fine Arts and Music goes, what type of class sizes do people have? Are there any really large online classes or face-to-face classes, or predominantly smaller groups?
In making movies, we have between 700 and 1,000 students, so quite large. Okay,
and is that across a variety of faculties?
It's a breadth subject. So yeah, that's students from across the university, but just for one subject, making movies 1. Yeah.
Right. Anyone else?
Our breadth subjects are quite large as well, about 100 students, but our other classes are much smaller, so usually between 15 and 40 students.
Okay. Yeah, just wanted to get a little bit of feedback on where we should sort of focus the discussion as we go along. But it looks like obviously there is some large classes, so I mean some of these strategies are useful for larger classes. A lot of them work easier with smaller groups, but you can translate them using strategies for larger classes as well. So hopefully you'll get something out of those, Anna. So looking at the models and frameworks, I think there's some useful concepts to sort of start off with. And Kate Coleman's joined us, which is great. She must have finished her earlier session earlier, but I'll get her to join and share in a moment. But there's a nice article there by Tony Bates that looks at some of the issues around rapid change to online learning. And it's a little bit of a, Tony Bates is very practical, he's very pragmatic, he links theory and practice very well. This article is perhaps slightly bleaker in its outlook at this point. Some of the key concepts, really, if you're looking at designing for online learning and trying to bridge practical subjects, is really start with universal design sort of concepts around, accessibility, inclusion, being student-centered. Pick up those sorts of keys when you're starting to design your subjects for online. Flipping the classroom is a great model that a lot of people get a lot out of. I think it can be used really, really powerfully. If all you're doing, though, is just changing the time of when activities happen, then there's no real pedagogical change. If all you're doing is changing time of content delivery to being homework time, then there's no significant change there. I've got a little recording there from a lecturer that I've worked with who's actually a paramedic lecturer, and he just discusses some of his experiences of flipping the classroom and the benefits that he's found from doing that and rethinking the teaching process as part of that as well. So chunking information and content via the flip model rather than just flipping your entire lecture as one large lecture that's delivered online, because no one's going to watch it. They're just going to turn it off and go and make a coffee. So if you can chunk stuff into themes and then throw in discussion and group work around it online, then it's going to work a lot better. No one wants to watch a huge long lecture online. There's some good practice around some of the more sort of, I guess, hackathons and stuff like that people have been using that can be transferred into other contexts as well. I like this little article here, which says, focus on three things, three types of activity when you're designing your courses: student to content activity, student to student interaction, and educator and student interaction. So try to design all three of those. Don't just focus on content delivery online. It'll be incredibly boring. How can we reimagine hybrid learning? And this was actually a link that Kate Coleman shared, and I thought it was from Microsoft. And I'm not particularly much of a Microsoft fan, but I quite like this little article, this little report, where they're focusing on what are some of the benefits of online teaching and learning, and some of the key areas that you can benefit are actually to amplify learning, to accelerate and connect learners and put it within a global audience. So using online tools, you can bring into your class experts from all around the world. You don't have to fly them over. You can get them to do a Zoom link if they're in a similar time zone, or pre-record something that can speak into your class, or have an asynchronous discussion with them and bring the worldwide experts into your class. And the good thing about education is that generally people are willing to share. They're willing to get out of bed early or late and speak into other contexts, particularly if you're willing to do the same for them back. The next thing I really like is this idea of network learning communities, about really looking at creating your online classes, your courses around a community model and it being a network model. How can you link into that course, that class, various elements beyond the class? And obviously online allows you to be able to do that in various ways. There's a few nice articles around that. And a very nice keynote from Catherine Cronin, who's from Ireland. She's actually American, but she lives and teaches in Ireland. And she's got a great keynote there, video from a conference a couple of years ago. One practical way to do this sort of thing is leverage things like geolocation. So one of the things I like to do in my classes is get students to add to a collaborative map, a Google map. and place themselves on the map, whether that be their hometown, where they were born, where they associate with, or where they work, and giving sort of a geographical type of context to the actual class. So here's an example of the course that Jeanette's currently involved in. So you can see Jeanette's hometown here. And it was just really interesting by getting students to do this, to see, you know, where people are from and what sort of influences really they bring, what experiences they bring, all from all around the world. So from a group of lecturers in Melbourne, we have this incredibly wealthy global context. So thinking about simple tools for geolocation and how that can enhance your learning environment as well. And this is a term I don't know if anyone else has actually coined, but I just came up with myself. Of everyone's heard of bring your own device, or how about build your own MOOC as a bit of a model, looking at open educational resources and reimagining your class maybe as being broader than just the class that's being accredited, but allowing anyone to perhaps speak into it and take it. So I want to jump over to one of the key concepts that I found quite powerful, is this column around designing learner-centric ecologies of resources. And mainly as a bit of a segue into getting Kate to do her presentation. So the idea of ecology of resources, as you can see, this one's actually linking to a different Padlet, is that you have all these tools, these tools that work together. So in ecology only works when each element of the ecology is in sort of symbiotic relationship. It doesn't work when you get a predator, which is not in that natural habitat, and it takes over and destroys it. So I guess one of the examples I would have would be possums. It's strange that in Australia possums are protected, whereas in the New Zealand habitat they don't have a natural predator, and so they're actually a real pain. And so we go out of our way to kill possums because they're destroying our natural habitat. So it was quite interesting for me to, a number of years ago, visiting my wife's auntie in Sydney, and driving down the road late at night and seeing a possum on the road and swerving to miss it. Whereas in New Zealand, we would probably swerve to hit it. So this ecology is kind of like a mix of tools that work together. And coming back to the idea of Padlet, etc., and Canvas, there isn't just one tool that does everything. As far as social media goes, I guess the closest there would be Facebook. And the idea of Facebook is that it's its own ecosystem. It's its own universe. And it doesn't want you to go outside of Facebook. So it tries to keep you in Facebook. And it makes it hard to link to outside of it as well. So the idea of social media is that it links well, that it links to other social media, that you have long tail, that you have an RSS feed or a rich site summary that allows you to bring in other forms of social media, and so Facebook does not do that. And in a similar way, I guess our learning management systems are kind of trying to be the one size fits all type of approach and managed by the institution. But what they're really good at is administration and marking and all that back end sort of hub stuff. They're not really great at doing the social aspect. They're not really great at personalizing for the students. So how can we choose a variety of tools that work together well, that sort of link together in this ecosystem to create a much more student-centered learning environment? So that brings us to this concept of a learner-centric ecology of resources. And I've got a link there to via a Twitter moment of several different ones from examples that you can have a look at from different contexts. And looking at the course that I'm teaching at the moment, we have an ecology of resources where we're using a whole variety of tools, and Jeanette's probably going to talk a little bit about that. From a student perspective, hopefully it's good. but it's based upon theory as well, and the theory comes from Lucan from 2008. And here's another example that might be relevant from contemporary music that I worked with. We've used a design-based research methodology as a methodology to help us go through framing this and choosing different tools. So in a design-based research methodology, you have 4 stages. First stage is analysis, exploration. What's the problem? What is the pedagogical issue? What's the learning problem? What's a core, a fundamental thing that your students are struggling with? And then looking at the literature and what have people done before? Has someone solved that? Is there literature around that already? And if there isn't, then it's right for you to be able to step into that. So looking at what are some design principles around that particular issue that you're trying to solve in pedagogy and learning, and then going from there into like a rapid prototyping, perhaps creating an idea, an outline of a particular learning activity or a module or a course, depending on how granular you want to go. And then of course trying that out with your students and getting student evaluation and feedback, and then going back into a redesign loop. And then you might have to dip back into the literature and go, well, that didn't quite work, and why didn't it work? Did I miss something? Oh, you might go, well, that was fantastic, and what did we learn from that? And from that, developing transferable design principles so you can speak into other contexts and share that. And that's kind of what we're doing today, is sharing a few principles from other contexts as well. And so from that, we basically brainstormed an ecology of resources for contemporary music. And this was about 3 years ago. So some of these tools don't exist anymore, as the nature of technology is that it changes, and it changes rapidly, particularly with mobile technology. So for example, we broke this up into 5 core areas, 5 core contexts. What are the 5 core elements that you're trying to achieve in this context? So one is we want our students to collaborate. We want our students to share their work and be able to publish it. So in contemporary music, it's all about getting your music out there. We're wanting to create an evidence-based student e-portfolio, portfolio of their work that they can showcase, that they can hopefully get a job from, that they can continue with beyond the formal course. We want to leverage their own devices, the devices that they own. We want them to get communication skills and creative skills. And of course, we need to bring all this together, and there's the admin backside, there's the passing, of the course, there's the marks, etc. And so we need tools to do that. And so figuring out the 5 core areas that we wanted to target and what were some appropriate tools for that particular context. And each context is going to be different. So it's thinking through what's an authentic ecology of resources for your context. And you as the discipline expert will know that. And what are people actually using in that professional context now that you can bring into the student learning experience, rather than trying to shoehorn into it something that doesn't fit just because it's supported by the institution, and choosing appropriate tools. So in this particular context, we're using iPads, because it just makes sense in recording and music production, that physicality, that multi-touch interface just works so much better than a mouse and a keyboard. So an iPad with its touch interface is just so much more an authentic tool in that context. And GarageBand is a free app for recording your music, or if you want to step it up beyond that, etc. And you can see in the collaboration we had at that stage, Google Plus communities, well, they don't exist anymore. So what's a collaboration tool that you can use to get your students working together? So this idea of an ecology of resources, a group of tools that perhaps you as the educator choose and maybe even negotiate with your students and bring together into this ecology concept. So what I'd like to do at this stage is flick it over to Catherine, because Catherine has a nice little presentation, which is actually in this Padlet, on studio-based strategies, but it's really about a digital studio ecology you want to talk to that, Catherine, or do you want to just play the video?
No, you can watch it later.
Yeah, so I'll
I
stop
just thought I'd tell
sharing.
you a couple of quick things that I do. So, hello, I'm Kate. I acknowledge that I meet you today on the lands of the Wurundjeri Willam people, and thanks for letting me drop in. So I teach visual art and design at the Graduate School of Education. So I teach your graduates up in Studio 5 who are adding pedagogy into their practice. So I am already teaching graduates of art programs, many of them with multiple credentials as artists, as well as experience. And so thinking around how these ecologies might enable this shift in practice to understand how a pedagogy might be intertwined into that identity has been important online, because the physical studio space is such an important part of that usual ecology, that I've had to shift into their home ecologies and thinking about what they also have in their home spaces to enable the link in to what I'm doing in Canvas, what I also do in Teams. So I run a parallel teaching program across my 4 subjects. So I run a Teams class for every Canvas class, and they feed in and out of each other because Microsoft Teams has these really lovely bits that I want in my collaborative studio, which is when we come together. And I want them to be able to think about how their home studios, for many of them that are now very small because they can't access their larger out-of-home studios either, but how these kind of tools might enable that. So I use the collaboration tool a lot inside Canvas. I use Perusal, which lets me discuss and write marginalia around YouTube clips, for instance. It's a really lovely addition in Canvas. So I use as many collaboration tools in there as I can, and then I jump to Teams where I can use Flipgrid videos. I use a large Miro board because I teach design, so I use Miro as a pin-up board. So I can have the discussion in the collaboration tool and then just be hyperlinking to Teams. Teams also lets me run the home studio space as a portfolio, so that the kinds of pieces and practices that my students are working on, they can photograph, video, and then upload. And then I actually archive those each year, and I've done this even when we were in physical studios. I put them in Figshare and then I push them out as resources to people through multiple associations, and then they can take them to school as open ed texts. So everything we produce becomes a reusable feedback loop into the next year. All of the works that are produced are the works that we look at, for instance. So that kind of ecology model for me has been really important, because that's what I do as an artist and it's what I do as an art teacher. And so finding all of the tools that the university would give me were important ones. And many of my students are kind of anti-other kinds of platforms anyway. They'll use the university ones because they have a sense that they know that where this information is going. Some of them are Twitter users, but most of them are really not using other things apart from very specific artist identities. So it's been an interesting collection of tools and how we might actually work across them. Is there a video or guide for collaboration tool? Yes, all the learning environments things are created, and Collaborations has a really great accessible learning environments tool or resource for how it might actually be engaged. It uses a Google Doc because all students with their Uni Melbourne have Google Doc, Google emails attached, or you can use your OneDrive, depending on what you need to do. So how collaborative you want it to be. Google is much better as a co-authoring tool, even in slides, than Microsoft is. So, just depends on which one you want to work out of in there. Perusal lets you, though, collaborate in teams using multi-modalities. So Perusal, I can run a shared Vimeo video that I want them to watch, and then we might collaborate on that. So it actually, because it uses marginalia, you literally write around the actual artifact that you've dropped in. And then we might go across to Teams and maybe make a new Flipgrid video based on that, and then they will dump that back in. Teams uses apps, so whatever apps you want to use in Teams, you just attach. And there's a little plug. the little plug app that's on your wiki page in Canvas lets you link straight to Teams. So you can just push the classes back and forward from each other and actually start to build your digital ecology. I'm going to stop talking because I already put that in there for you. You can go and have a look at it, and very happy to catch up around any of those tools whenever you like.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, so Catherine's got a nice little video that I've embedded into the Padlet, so you can have a look at that under the studio-based ideas. I'm just going to jump back to screen sharing again as well. Hopefully I share the right screen this time. So just as I mean, we've got a lot of resources there in that Padlet and concepts, but I thought it'd be probably useful to just show some examples of how some of those concepts are put into practice. And so from my own examples around the GCUT course that I'm currently running, and that would kind of segue into how Jeanette has been sort of conceptualizing, applying some of those concepts to her own teaching, which would be great for her to share. So this concept of the Ecology of Resources for facilitating online course, we've used quite an eclectic mix, and I guess what I've been trying to do there is get people to experience a variety of different tools, get them to sort of think beyond PowerPoint and beyond Canvas, and then try to apply that to their own context. So I've probably pushed people pretty hard on getting them out of their comfort zones, but some of the tools that we've used, obviously we've been using Zoom, so we use that synchronously for a weekly discussion. And I've really focused that around being a discussion rather than a lecture format as such, because that's really what I want to achieve. I don't want it to be content delivery. Using Twitter as an asynchronous tool. And in a lot of the arts contexts, Twitter is a fantastic tool for amplifying your work, for getting out there. Say your SoundCloud latest upload, you can tweet that. Your latest video on YouTube or Vimeo or Metacalf, you can tweet the link to it and share it. And the key there is perhaps sort of modeling to your students how to do this professionally, because they know how to use social media, or predominantly they know how to use Facebook. Not a lot of them are engaging with Twitter, and particularly not professionally. So how do you model the professional use of these types of tools, which is really what you're wanting to achieve? So for example, we created the hashtag for the course, which is just the course code #EDUC90970. And of course, no one else is using it because it's such a naff hashtag that no one else would want to use it anyway. So by using a hashtag, you can filter information in Twitter if you haven't used Twitter. And instead of having to follow a whole range of different people, you can just search by the hashtag. And so this is a hashtag search, and it just pulled together all the content that's been tweeted using that hashtag. Here's Lyle. He's actually from MDSHS biostatistics, and this is his first experience of tweeting. That's his third tweet. So a variety of different tweets. You can see predominantly tweets from myself, but it is generally a bit of a new experience for most of the students. Some of the reasons for using these types of tools, well, they have data, they have a long tail that you can analyze. And so if you're wanting to see how are students engaging beyond, say, just Canvas analytics, if you're using Twitter, you can use Twitter analysis tools. And so this is an analysis tool from Martin Hawksey from the UK. It's called Tags Explorer. And it does very much a sort of a graphical overview of a hashtag search. So in this case, it's searching for that course hashtag. It's showing me the interaction, it's showing me there's 47 nodes. So there's 47 people active in this conversation around this course using the hashtag. There's 234 edges, which means there's been 234 conversations being had, whether that's mentions or retweets, etc. And I can click on these nodes and get some feedback. So Paul has probably been the most active student. And if I click on the top conversationalist here, you can see, well, obviously I'm the top there, but then Paula. is the next top conversationalist. And this tool allows us to do other cool things like replay the tweets as a video format. And so we can actually see how the conversations grew and perhaps what were the critical incidents that started creating the spread of these conversations. And you can start to see other nodes starting to appear as people get on board with using the hashtag for the course, etc. So it gives us a powerful way of analysing conversations. Another tool we've been using is Mendeley. So Mendeley is a bit like EndNote. It's a reference manager, but it's more than that. It's also a research network. And it just so happens that the University of Melbourne has an institutional license for Mendeley. And so you can create Mendeley groups of up to 100 participants, and you can store, I think, 100 gigabytes of data or something on Mendeley. So it's a great tool to use. And so created a shared collaborative library for the course. And if we scroll down here, you can see it's not just me adding to it, hopefully. I added a whole lot the other day. You can see Jeanette's added references to this collaborative library, Andrea, Chelsea, Pauline, etc. So it becomes a shared resource of, in this case, research relevant to teaching and learning. We've created a research project on ResearchGate. So if what you're doing is doing research around an aspect of the course and trying to model and bridge your students into research, then you can do things like mentor them into it by creating perhaps a ResearchGate project and inviting them into that as well. I've got another library that I've linked there from my Evernote, which is more references, recent references around COVID-19 teaching strategies. So one of the things that I'm keen for people to do is to start sharing their ideas, and one way to facilitate that is from CSHE. We have a research group around technology enhanced learning, and one of the outputs of those is around creating a CMOOC, which starts on the 14th of September. So just a bit of an ad for that to welcome. If you're interested in looking at some of these concepts and you want to explore perhaps accreditation around that as well, that might be a worthwhile activity for you. The other one is we've put out a call for the Scholarship of Technology Enhanced Learning Research Network, and get various contexts throughout the university sharing their ideas there around how they're using technology in teaching and learning, and to be able to seed those into other contexts. And as part of that, we've created the site, and you can see there, there is a page there for FFAM, and in fact, Jeanette has put a post there. And so I'm going to segue over to Jeanette, and Jeanette's going to just give us some outline of perhaps some of her experience of some of these concepts from the GCUT course.
Thanks, Tom. So it's been a great experience to be on the other end for a change and be a student and learning experientially through just playing around with a lot of these new online tools and networking opportunities. So that's been really helpful. I've just popped a link to that blog if you wanted to, the post that Tom just showed, because I've put a link in that blog to it's one of the outputs that we've got to do for the online learning course is to create an e-portfolio and do blog posts regularly and comment on each other's blog posts, which has been kind of a nice, that they're sort of small, manageable chunks of information, but it's helping us to keep engaged with each other and comment on each other's work, rather than that sort of more static submitting an assignment and getting it marked by your lecturer. The visitors and residents map that I don't know if Tom talked about that yet, but that was something that we did early on. Just really thinking about what are the different types of technologies that we use to connect online, and what our students might have access to, and what the differences, what maybe different platforms we might be using for professional or work related engagement versus sort of purely personal, and what crosses over all of those different areas. So that was kind of helpful for me to kind of map out what are the different, and it's quite amazing when you start sort of mapping down what are the different platforms that you use, how many there are that we interact with all the time these days. So that was useful. And then from a personal perspective, but then starting to think about how it might be helpful to use that kind of process with students to kind of see what resources or what platforms they are familiar with and already using that we can maybe bring into teaching to create that sense of social presence when we're all kind of online and remote learning. What else? Yes, so thinking about building the community of inquiry was another thing, and then building this ecology of resources. So thinking about how do we sort of scaffold our students and give them different tools that we can provide that we can use to make the learning more engaging, rather than just trying to do a dry Zoom lecture. And we've probably all realised very quickly that you can't really convert your online teaching straight into delivering the same thing online via Zoom. So as Thomas said, thinking about ways that we can make it more bite-sized chunks, more engaging, getting them to collaborate in different ways. Perusal is something that that a few people have talked about in this presentation, and I discovered that, yeah, just this year as well, and have used that in some of my classes. So that's been really a nice way to get the students interacting and making sure that they're doing the readings, because they're kind of, and their feedback as well is that they've enjoyed the readings a lot more, because people are asking questions and kind of having this sort of discussion and debate in amongst themselves around the reading. So they're kind of engaging a little bit more, which is good. And it sort of in some ways replicates maybe what you might do in an in-class situation, where you're getting them to kind of break into groups and talk about readings and things. What else have I learned? So many things, Tom.
I mean, I guess one of the things to start with would have been setting up your e-portfolio. And I know, because for most of the participants in the course, they were new to WordPress, and I asked people to use WordPress. It's not the most intuitive tool to start with, so it did require a fair bit of upfront work, didn't it, Jeanette?
Yes. Yes, there was a lot of discussion amongst us as students about our frustrations in getting going, and lots of hours of just randomly clicking around in there to try and make it work. But it's been a good experience in a way, and I think it's useful to have built that e-portfolio. I mean, I kind of probably took it beyond what I needed to for the course, because I thought, you know, this can now be a site where I can kind of keep all of my publications and research projects and things all in the same place. So it's actually a functional e-portfolio for me anyway, as well as being somewhere where we're posting our course blogs. And I've also now so we've got this faculty one that Tom set up, but I'm also trying to set up another WordPress site for our research group for music therapy in neurological disorders. And so we're going to try and post all of our, collect all of our different research projects and outputs and media. And so it's kind of been another way to learn, another learning application from the course for me has kind of come out from that into research dissemination as well. And also creating Mendeley and ResearchGate groups for our research group in music therapy, which has been useful as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
So is it okay if I share your blog with people?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to jump back into screen sharing. What I liked about Jeanette's blog is that it kind of tells the story of obviously it's being, you know, guided by the course, but of applying some of these concepts that I've put into the Padlet there into her own context in teaching and learning, and looking at some of the key aspects along the way. So we started with an intro video, asked all the students to share a little video of themselves to start with, just to try to sort of bridge that get that community feel going, get that personalization sort of feel going. And so just having like a 2-minute or 1-minute video of introduce yourself to the class, and then hosting that online. Well, it was a nice way to start, I thought, anyway. And then getting people to think about visitors and residents and where they sit on that technology sort of map as such, and then to actually see that perhaps their students are not actually that far ahead of them as far as technology goes, because all they do is Facebook, Snapchat, and Instagram. And once you take them beyond that, they're completely out of their depth. And certainly they probably don't have a professional portfolio yet. So building that into the course is going to be a new experience for your students, and how do you scaffold that? And then starting to think about how to take that into our own practice, even beyond the course, and establishing research groups. So I just think it's a really nice example of putting those concepts into practice, perhaps particularly with within the context of fine arts and music. So anyway, coming back to a little bit around practical strategies. So for example, if you're going to explore e-portfolios with your students, you really need to rethink how you manage those. Don't just try to put onto an e-portfolio the strategies that you would have used for an exam or for an essay. It doesn't work. So if you're, basically instead of getting students to do an essay, you get them to do an e-portfolio or a blog, and you never engage with that until it's due to be handed in, well, they've had no formative feedback along the way, and it's too late when they hand that in. So the key aspect of an e-portfolio is being able to bring into that community, be able to bring into that peer commenting, be able to bring into that formative feedback. And the way to do that is to be able to monitor those blogs. And that may seem like a lot of work, even with 20 or 30 students, but you can use technology to make that bridge. And this is an example here, using a tool called Flipboard, which has a web-based platform, but actually started life as a mobile app for the iPad. And they actually built the web interface later. So it's actually an add-on. It's a mobile first application that is then bridged across to web-based, which actually means that the web-based platform's a little bit clunkier, which I think our students kind of found as we started using it. So basically Flipboard is like a visual magazine. It allows you to curate online content. And what we've used it for here is to curate the students' blogs. And so you can see it's back to front, just like a blog. Here's the latest stuff that's been posted. This is just an article I found interesting this morning while eating my breakfast, and so I decided to share it with the students. And then the students, as they've been blogging, they've been set to, at specific points along the course, at 4 different points along the course, to do a blog post of a certain number of words and to include in that APA referencing. So we're putting an educational framework around that. It's not just random, blog whatever you want to about it. It's actually aligned to the course and has marks and assessments associated with it, and a rubric for marking as well. So you need to sort of scaffold this. You can't just throw a new tool out there and expect people to know how to use it. So I really like Flipboard as a sort of visual metaphor for curating all of these different resources. This Flipboard works when you've got a relatively small group. I know, Anna, you said you had several hundred students. Well, there are other tools to be able to do that at scale. And so if I just flip to my iPad, and this is another RSS reading tool called Feed Reader. And I'm just running the Feed Reader app here on my iPad. It also has a web interface, so you can just use it in a web browser if you want to, but the experience is much better on a mobile device such as the iPad. And you can subscribe to any number of online news sites, blogs, YouTube channels, anything that has a web link. And you can see I've done this for a number of years. for various projects. And so I've actually got thousands of different sites that FeedReader monitors for me, and the latest ones are the EDUC course student blogs. And so effectively what happens is I can look at a group there, here's the student groups, and the software automatically goes and checks all those blogs for me, and I can just change the mode. I can skim through those really, really quickly and go, okay, well, someone's, people are commenting, which is fantastic. Do I need to comment on any of these posts? Is anyone missing the point? Is anyone going off on a tangent? And I can really, really quickly see where people are at. And I can also see the engagement, the commenting going on. And so this can scale into numbers. So scale beyond 20, 30 to thousands, because the software is doing the work for you. So you can even change the view. So in this case, you're just getting the titles. You can quickly scan that, see what's new, see if there's anything you need to jump in or comment on and monitor or not. You can also break this up into groups. So you could do this as peer groups or tutor groups and have a number of blogs that or portfolios or SoundCloud channels or YouTube channels or Vimeo channels or whatever that you're checking your students' work and giving them feedback on. So just some hints around tools and perhaps the scalability of those as well. So I guess I'd like to just jump back into discussion at this point, and really, we haven't got a lot of time left. We've kind of got about 5 minutes, but just really to see if there's any burning questions that people have, ideas that people would like to share. Maybe, if you've got some examples of best practice you'd like to share, then let's just throw it open.
Oh.
Takamine. I play Takamine. I've got a 341 SC, which is the Dreadnought. Okay. And because there's a story coming up, because I was supposed to actually go and work in Melbourne in April. Of course, my Takamine ended up on a boat to Melbourne, and then we couldn't fly over, so my guitar and my keyboards and my mandolin and my ukulele are all in storage in Melbourne, and I was starting to get withdrawal symptoms, so I went out and bought myself a Martin the other day. So I now have a Martin and a Takamine.
I have a question, Thomas. Well, I've got a few. Thank you. This has been a brilliant session. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you to everybody, and thank you. But in our massive course, students have already set themselves up a Facebook, which is great. Keen beans. But we can never compete with Facebook. And of course, we're a special case because we're such a big course. But what can you do in that case? Because we, don't want to discourage students from using their own initiative. And with a small class, it would be easy to say, hey, bring it over to something else. But any ideas for, or what are the best kind of social platforms that obviously are not Facebook, or any ideas around that? Yeah,
well, the key issues around Facebook are, one, everyone has one. Well, actually not everyone does. I mean, I have a Facebook profile, but I never use it. All we use it for is trolling our kids. But I don't contribute to it. And when we did the visitor and residence map with the class, for me, I'm definitely a visitor with Facebook, whereas I'm a resident with WordPress, I'm a resident with Twitter, etc. Yeah. So I guess the key around when you're trying to come up with this idea of an ecology of resources, it shouldn't just be because the biggest numbers are there. It doesn't necessarily mean that's the best tool or the right tool to use. And Facebook, of course, has the numbers, but it's not particularly a good tool, and you can't filter out all the social aspects. And
absolutely, it's quite problematic.
Students of their photos of their parties and bits of their anatomy and stuff like that. So, if they're enrolling in a course, then you have the right and the option to say to them, these are the tools you need to use for this course.
Yeah.
And Facebook is not one of them. So you either do that and you set the groundwork and the framework educationally and say, just as if I would require you to use Microsoft Word to write your essay and submit it, you're going to use this platform for this course for your portfolio, and it's not Facebook, it's WordPress or it's Vimeo or whatever is appropriate. And then you've got to come up with obviously the framework and the justification and the why, and I would link that to what, as a graduate, what's the professional tool they're going to use. And it possibly maybe Facebook, but you know, if that is the case, then perhaps you should be using Facebook. But if it's not, then there's your argument.
Yeah,
you know?
Thank you for that. What are the best social collaborative tools that you would recommend actually to replace those kinds of discussions? I mean, there's Canvas, but it's not terribly inspiring. But
so I guess I find Twitter really powerful as a tool, because when you're see Meredith,
Sorry.
it kind of